All right, y'all, you are joining us for a very special mini-series here at PreventConnect. I am Janae Sargent, and I am joined by my colleague, friend, and oftentimes co-host, Ashley Klein-Jimenez.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley. We're doing this mini-series that is looking at the transformative journey of the Delta Project, a first-of-its-kind initiative by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention aimed at preventing intimate partner violence. Over the course of the episodes, we will explore the rich history, innovative approaches, and profound impact of Delta through the voices of those who have been instrumental in its success.
Join us as we sit down with CDC, national technical assistance providers, and past and present Delta grantees who share their unique insights and experiences. From the early days of Delta to the latest advancements in Delta Ahead, this podcast celebrates the strategies that have shaped intimate partner violence prevention at the community and societal levels.
You're listening to PreventConnect, the podcast bringing together voices from across the movement to end gender and power-based violence, to give you the tools to practice primary prevention in your daily life and at work. We're highlighting emerging research, promising strategies, and stories from on-the-ground prevention practitioners doing this work in new and innovative ways. Bringing you topics like foundational strategies to prevent violence, primary prevention and youth engagement, critical race theory and school climates, prevention in a digital age, and more. I'm your host, Janae Sargent, and this is PreventConnect.
Welcome back to another episode of Delta Reflections, Shaping the Future of Intimate Partner Violence Prevention. We are thrilled to hear from our guests who are two Delta recipients, the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We have with us Lucy Rios, the Executive Director, and Cynthia Roberts, the Evaluator for RICADV. Y'all have been a recipient of Delta funding for many years, and we are so lucky to have Lucy and Cynthia because you've both played really pivotal roles in implementing and evaluating primary prevention strategies. So, Lucy, Cynthia, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for this opportunity.
Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here.
Amazing. Well, Lucy, we want to just start with you because we understand that initially you came to the coalition to lead Rhode Island's Delta Project. I'm just hoping you could share a little bit about that history and what that experience was like for you.
I started at the coalition as the Delta coordinator back in 2003. And prior to coming to the organization, I worked with young people, did a lot of youth-based prevention strategies in my hometown. And actually, Cynthia and I worked together even before Delta when we did some social emotional learning in the school system. And then when I came to the coalition to lead the prevention work, I had a lot of the prevention background. What was missing for me was really understanding the domestic violence pieces. So I'll say the early years, when I think about the early years of Delta, I would describe them as struggling together. Those first few years of Delta, where the CDC had made this investment in working with coalitions to prevent intimate partner violence before it started. And they recognized it was going to be long-term investment, social change is slow, and they knew right away that they wanted to bring in coalitions because we already were building capacity at the community level. We had the relationships with community organizations, our member agencies. That vision that CDC had was bumping up against what domestic violence advocates were experiencing at that time. So prevention was new. And our definition of prevention definitely evolved over the years of working with CDC. a lot of us were doing, harm reduction, a lot of secondary prevention, helping to young people to understand, the warning signs, in the community to understand the warning signs and how to prevent future violence, so interrupt it and then prevent future violence from occurring. But we weren't really looking at the root causes and really looking at primary prevention. So there was a lot of struggle in the early years because as advocates, we wanted to make sure CDC really understood domestic violence and that it was rooted in power and control and in patriarchy. And the CDC was really trying to bring in the science and frameworks to help advocates in the community have a deeper understanding of the problem. So they brought in frameworks like the social ecological model that was new to us, 20 plus years ago. Now we see it all everywhere, and our many advocates are using it to shape their prevention work. But at that time, it was very new. And there was a lot of concern when you look at some of the risk factors there. There was a lot of concern around making sure that we weren't stigmatizing or undoing any of the advocacy that we had done to help people understand that domestic violence wasn't caused by alcohol or substance abuse, for example. And here came the CDC asking for us to look at risk factors, that being one of them. And there's just a lot of concern in the advocacy community at that time around could this cause harm? The other piece, I think, when I think about those early years, is there was so much focus on capacity building the coalition's capacity to understand what the public health approach was to prevention, to domestic violence prevention, where we focused on what is primary prevention? What are the different levels of prevention? How can prevention and intervention work together? How could they complement one another and not compete with one another? We learned about social norms, about helping communities understand how harmful norms contribute to violence. I remember an activity that was made by one of our colleagues, Hot Dogs for Breakfast. Many folks have heard of that activity. If you haven't, look it up. It's a great way to help community members understand how social norms are created and ways in which we can interrupt those norms. We also learned a lot about promising practices around prevention. So the principles of prevention, social change theory, community organizing, getting to outcomes. We learned a lot about evaluation and empowerment evaluation. When I say struggling together, it was also about learning together and also about collaborating. Because that's the other thing that I remember about my time with Delta is just how much the Delta organizers across the 14 states at that time relied on one another. We shared ideas, we shared our concerns with one another, and really were in a lot of conversation all of the time, really collaborating, sharing resources. We traveled to one another's states to help support whether it was at a conference or a CCR that was struggling with moving in towards or pivoting to doing primary prevention work, or maybe we had a strategy that that state was interested in learning more about. And so there was so much collaboration, so much that was co-created together, and there was no ego involved. People were sharing activities, showing us how to do it. I just really appreciate when I look back at those early years, if all of those ingredients were there, the science, but then also that collaboration, even thinking about just how long I've been with the coalition, I think those things helped keep me grounded in the work and what we were doing, and supported to be able to go further.
You've really sort of painted a picture of what those early days looked like. To hear about kind of like the synergy and the reciprocal nature of Delta. I think a lot of times we think about how public health has brought so much to our work to prevent violence, but your comments about what the coalitions brought to the funding organization, about the history of domestic violence and what the knowledge that was in the movement, right? From hearing from survivors, from listening to advocates, from seeing how domestic violence and the context of domestic violence really inform prevention, I think is so important. And probably one of the reasons why there has been so much success in Delta, because of that kind of like symbiotic relationship. And it's just so great to hear how the Delta recipients over the years have been able to really support one another and lift up each other's successes and problem solve challenges together. And that's something that I've definitely noticed through the years. And it just has seemed like a really vibrant, important community of practitioners. Lucy, one thing that I vividly remember, because I think that my first interaction with you was when you were leading the Delta work. And then I remember hearing that you were then going to move into the executive director role. And my first thought was, wow, that's so neat that someone who is so passionate and dedicated to prevention, someone who has so much leadership around prevention of intimate partner violence, is now going to actually be leading the organization. And so I'm wondering how you feel that your experiences in Delta have influenced the way that you lead the organization today.
I'd say leading the Delta work requires that you have vision, that you build relationships, not only at the community level, but with state partners, with your colleagues, and that you have a real commitment to social justice and racial justice. And the ability to collaborate with multiple stakeholders. And so you can't work in Delta and not be able to have all of those things present. And so I've taken that and applied it to my new role. I've only been in the executive director role now for a little shy of 2 years. And I would say, I talked about how important like that collaboration and that peer support was during Delta. I've also, over the years, have built that network of support because of the experience that I had in Delta. I knew that I was able to thrive because of that support. And so now stepping into this role, I'm also trying to do that and making sure that we have a strong team and that I have people that I can lean on both in and outside of the organization. When I think about how Delta spent so much time, again, not only building our capacity, but also developing that shared language, that shared vision for the future. I hold on to that. And I think about the gender-based violence movement and the steps that I have seen in the overall movement, but specifically in prevention, because prevention was easy marriage. When you started doing primary prevention and you started focusing on those root causes, it became very clear that you couldn't do that without holding a racial justice lens. I think we've had a lot of success in Rhode Island building those relationships with more grassroots and BIPOC-led organizations. And I want to see that continue to happen, but in the services lens. So a lot of the lessons that I have learned and the values that were important, the skills that you need to do the prevention work, I have taken them in. Hopefully, I'm going to be successful as the leader of the organization for years to come. I will say, too, that with prevention, what's so clear about it, it's we're not teaching our way out of this issue, that it's really about the community and empowering the community and taking the community's lead to address those root causes and put protective factors in place to prevent this violence from continuing to happen in our communities. And the community leads in that way. Our prevention work, it drives it. And again, making sure that we're intentionally moving in a way that promotes both gender justice and racial justice.
That is so powerful. And I feel that so deeply. I really resonate with what you shared about prevention really being a lens, a really natural and happy partnership between anti-oppression and all the systemic oppressive pieces that impact violence. And it really kind of shifting the way that we do this work. And I know that to do that, the way that you have in Rhode Island requires a really strong and passionate leader, which it sounds like your team has in you, and a committed team across the board. And Cynthia, that's where I kind of come to you as well. You've been a part of Delta for many years, and we've recently gotten to hear from you and your deputy director, Krista Cunningham, on some PreventConnect web conferences as the coalition's evaluator, because we know with something as innovative and as new as Delta was, evaluation plays such a key role. How has the focus of Delta programs evolved since you first came involved? And what changes have you seen in the strategies used?
So I just a few weeks ago celebrated my 10th anniversary here at the coalition. So I've been here 10 years now. And thank you. It actually, this kind of work is so deep and so connected to so many things that 10 years just can go by in such a flash, because if anything, this is just constant learning and just change. So I would say from when I first came here, I was coming into the DV work from public health, from our health department, working in tobacco control. And a lot of the work, that I was working on was focused on outer layer strategies and environmental and policy strategies and culture change, within tobacco control. So when I came, and a lot of health equity related stuff going on the state level at our health department. So when I came here, the coalition aspect of the work was what really drew me, most strongly into the work. And kind of like what Lucy was saying, that she had to learn about domestic violence when she came in. So did I, because I didn't have a background in that. But I had a prevention background, and then, the public health evaluation background. And when I came in, their CDC's Delta work was very intentionally and with a lot of support and basically insistence. And I mean that in a positive and supportive way, that CDC was really insisting that the work move from a focus on education more into those policy systems and environment change approaches. So that was really exciting for me, because the coalition was so based in relationships and connection and systems change work. And then CDC was having our primary prevention work move in those ways. So it was very exciting. So right around when I came on, about a year prior, Lucy and the folks that she was working with at the time developed the 10 Men strategy, which was focusing on changing the culture around norms around men's violence. It wasn't a program strictly based on educating people about domestic violence. It was on gathering people together who were male identified to come together and say, we want to change the culture that, creates and promotes violence in our communities. So that was really exciting. And then other changes were in terms of focusing on the social ecological model, like Lucy was saying. We were really required to work at the outer layers of the social ecological model. So just as Lucy was saying, we had to work with our partners, our funded partners, and it was struggling together. We had to learn together and educate ourselves about what does it mean to work at the outer layers of primary prevention. But then how are we going to select strategies that will have more of a population impact and that are more sustainable over time? because that's a big part of the public health focus, and that outer layer focus is there's limited dollars, and what kinds of strategies will have more of an impact on a larger number of people, because there really was no playbook for that. And part of Delta, it was and still is, we as a community are helping inform the field through the work we do with the communities and our partners, and then the implementing and evaluating it. What does that look like? So part of the work is figuring out the work. And I really like that. And it's been very developmental. And that, I think, is exciting because you really feel like you're contributing to new strategies that will then help us move the needle.
Those are such awesome examples. Thank you so much for sharing, and really help to give some context to the work that you all are doing. Lucy, it sounds like you were involved in some really incredible stuff. So I'm wondering, are there any initiatives from your Delta work that you're particularly proud of, or that continue to inspire you in the realm of all of the amazing things that you're doing?
Yeah. So Cynthia mentioned 10 Men, and 10 Men is near and dear to my heart. To see 10 Men evolve over time, like come together from like just this idea of like, let's just mobilize men in our community and see who shows up and see who wants to take this work on with us. And then fast forward, we're now in like our 11th cohort. Is that right, Cynthia? 11th cohort of 10 men. And to know that, we have over 100 men that have gone through the program at some point. And thinking about the ripples that they will each have, because we know that this work, again, it's based on relationships, and we need to help everyone in the community identify what the role is that they can play to prevent domestic violence from happening. Anytime I'm in a 10-man space, I'm like, there are men that don't want to see this continue to happen. Like, it fills you up with hope each and every time, whether it's a networking event or just seeing a post from one of the men. It just makes me so happy. It makes me feel like we are going to get to the other side, and we are going to see the culture shift that we're aiming for. And it's happening already, and it's only going to get larger the more and more that we continue to engage folks. And then there's other strategies that we've done in the past that lived through their cycle. Like, they were great when they were happening. They were so important. They made an impact. One of them is one that was not work that we're doing currently, but it was youth-based work to the Students Against Domestic Abuse that was led through one of our partners, the Women's Resource Center in Newport. And they did that for many years. And some of those young people, are now adults doing their part in breaking the cycle of abuse in the community. I have a lot of fond memories of that strategy of SADA, Students Against Domestic Abuse, of even Primary Prevention Institute, which was a strategy where we wanted to bring in community partners to help build their capacity, all share the lessons that we had learned with Delta. And some of those partners now have their own robust domestic violence prevention programs. Most recently, I wasn't involved in the development of this plan, but our state primary prevention plan that was launched last year. Oh my gosh, check me if it's not last year. Maybe it was the year before. Time is like, but it is beautiful. And if you have not seen our state prevention plan, it is available on our website. So for folks that are listening, it was led by one of our colleagues, Krista, D'Amico, and Cynthia. And it's just so well done. It's beautifully designed, but just, again, seeing the work, like focus those buckets of work around creating safe and supportive environment and addressing the root causes. And making sure that we're evaluating and making sure that prevention work is well resourced. Like, all of the strategies that are listed in that plan, the way it was developed, from beginning to end with, in partnership with the state leadership team. I'm really proud of it. It makes me really hopeful that Rhode Island is going to be one of those states where domestic violence will come to an end. I'm very hopeful about that.
Thank you, Lucy. And gosh, from everything that we have had the honor of witnessing and learning about that is happening in Rhode Island, I absolutely think that that will be the case. In fact, many, or I think almost all of the examples that you just provided of initiatives and strategies that you think fondly on, we've had the opportunity to feature on PreventConnect, at least some elements of those. And so we'll definitely put links in the show notes to where they can learn more about Pen Then and your state plan, and then where we featured those on PreventConnect, because they're just so inspiring. So thanks again for sharing all that. Cynthia, I want to turn back to you for a moment. And one thing that you shared that was just kind of like an aha moment for me was we were talking about, the work in Delta to really move to the outer layers. While we know that we need education, people need to be aware that intimate partner violence is a problem and that prevention is a solution. It's also not going to get us to the population level change that we need. And I never worked on Delta as like a subrecipient or a recipient, but I was an RPE subrecipient. And I remember when RPE also started moving more in the direction of looking out at outer layer strategies and really having a hard time like understanding what that would look like in practice. And the work coming out of Delta was so helpful in looking at pivot and how I thought about prevention and just understanding what it could look like on the ground. It truly has been such a gift to prevention. But I'm wondering, looking back over the years, thinking about all of the work you've been involved in from an evaluation perspective, if you would share some of the key successes and challenges that you've, uncovered measuring the impact of Delta-funded projects.
Yeah, I like to think of things as like a coin with two sides. So I feel like the successes and challenges are like part of the same story. And I feel like the challenges are really what have guided us to figure out our best approaches and solutions to evaluation, not only here in Rhode Island, but like as a national community together, because the same things that we struggle with around measuring and meaningfully assigning like meaning to and impact, other states do too. So it has been really helpful to be part of a national cohort of folks implementing and evaluating this because we really learned together. One of our key challenges has been how do we communicate about the findings from our various components of evaluation outside of the prevention choir. So we work really closely with our state leadership team. You've heard us talk about them a bunch already in this conversation. So we've really co-created knowledge together around this. But one challenge is like, how do we take that out to broader populations of like interest holders across sectors within our movement? Because most of our movement is funded by criminal legal funding. So it's kind of a worldview thing, like prevention is a type of way of seeing the world. And so we've had to figure out how do we communicate our findings that are so close to the strategies in ways that actually mean something and are like interesting and meaningful to people outside of the work, like the IPV primary prevention work. So most recently, we developed and launched within about the last 5 to 6 months, a data dashboard that really brings together what we've been trying to kind of tell the story around. And along the lines of what we've also been saying today about how you really can't separate domestic violence as the problem. You have to understand it at all different levels to understand primary prevention, because you're getting pretty abstract when you get into like green and open space and like how does increasing green and open space prevent intimate partner violence. So our data dashboard, which is a partnership across teams here at the RICADV, the prevention team, our communications team, our policy team, and many staff on our, just across all of our teams here, and our SIG leadership team helped bring this dashboard into being. And we kind of show the continuum of, here are the main data points that we've collected and continue to share like over many years with our partners. People are always asking for around intimate partner violence. And then here are some community-based strategies on the data dashboard where you can kind of go in a nested way, and you can see like, here's a picture of the community. Here's, housing and economic supports and green and open space and youth leadership and engaging men and survivors to change the culture. And then we also have included the most important foundational documents that help inform these data points and these various worldviews. That's been a good strategy, and it's going to continue to expand and grow. We just presented on it last week at a core injury and violence prevention gathering of the Northeast, and folks were there from various programs that address violence and injury prevention. And there were people from other sectors too, like transportation, and just showing them a very brief kind of picture of what our data dashboard is generated a lot of conversation about how we are working across sectors, how we're sharing data, how we're making meaning together. So I would say I'm just lifting up that as a tool, because we've had many, whether it's conference posters or podcasts we've participated in, our webinars or slide presentations, but bringing a lot of that together in one place, I think is really going to help us move together and learn more together about what IPV primary prevention is, without losing also the pieces about the problem of domestic violence and like understanding it on the continuum. During the pandemic, we were lucky to get some supplemental COVID funding from CDC, from Delta, and our colleague who also led the that same vision document that Lucy was referencing, Krista. Some people know her as Krista D'Amico, also Krista Cunningham, most recently. And she also led a really incredible video series with our community partners called Voices of Change. And that was kind of us trying to lean into marrying evaluation and communications and storytelling that so many of us in the movement now are really leaning into.
That video series is incredible. It's very inspiring, but also to like hear the voices from the community members. It just, like you said, it tells a story more so than we could ever tell in a report. It puts people's real lives, all of their humanity into what we are trying to do to prevent violence. And it's really beautiful. And I am so excited for you all that the data dashboard is up. So we'll definitely link that also in our show notes. But I think that it's been really incredible watching you all lean into storytelling to bridge your implementation and your data and your findings. So thank you for walking us through that. Both of you have just been so involved with Delta from, really the beginnings. And there are folks who we've been able to talk to over the last couple of weeks who started also many years ago with Delta. And at the same time, there are new people who are just coming into kind of the magic and the promise of the Delta project. And so for folks who have been doing this work and for folks who are newer to this work, I'm wondering if you would share some of like your top lessons learned and any hopes that you have for the future of Delta and its continued impact on intimate partner violence prevention.
Thinking about lessons learned for Delta, especially for folks that are just getting started, I think remembering that this work takes a long time. It requires patience, relationship building. You can't do it alone. You have to engage others. So it requires that you build in that time to go have coffee, get to know the community leaders, show up at their events. Like all of that is part of the work. It requires that you think outside the box, that you're not afraid to take a risk. When I think back at before we started the 10-men program, some of the questions that I received from both the leadership team and also our organizational leader at the time, who was super supportive, but again, wanted to make sure that we're trying something new, that we're being intentional about thinking about what risks could there potentially be with moving forward with the strategy like 10 Men. It's like not being afraid to fail and just try it. If you're doing it in partnership with other people, then most likely you're on the right track. The other piece is we always talk about domestic violence requires all of us to get involved, to be aware, to be educated. But it also requires us as leaders and as advocates to make sure that we're creating enough space for others to join us in the work, and also that we're creating enough space to support the leadership of others to do this work. If we can work ourselves out of a job, that's what we want, right? We want that this work to really be held by survivors in our community and by the community members. And so I would say, for someone who's starting off, is to make sure that you're thinking about that as part of your work, that your work is to lead it, but to support others in leading the work as well. And I think just really quickly, I'll just say for hopes, I hope that Delta, the vision was always that this would be a national funding stream where every state and territory would have the resources to focus on primary prevention. And I really hope that becomes a reality and, soon, within the next 5 years, because it's so important. If we really want to get ahead of this problem, all of us have to be working on it. And I know every state and territory is doing their part already in trying to work on primary prevention. The resources they're just very limited, the amount of resources for primary prevention. And I would love to see that expand, and also that it continue to be rooted in equity. That's been really important. We've seen how that has facilitated relationship building and collaboration, particularly in communities of color. And I hope that the work will continue to do that.
So much of what Lucy said resonates. So I would just really underscore the importance of partnerships. It can't be done just in isolation, not only within a state, but even nationally. I know that I understand our work better when I understand it in the national context. So learning from each other as a national cohort is so important. That's a big lesson learned. Another is that this work and understanding it together requires complexity thinking. So mere kind of thinking only is not going to help us understand how this work moves and what the changes look like. So having and honoring multiple ways of knowing and understanding, not only looking at quantitative measures to try and understand how change is happening, but looking at qualitative data, emergent structures that we might not understand. I think just being really open to what is being presented in a complex way is a lesson learned. Unlearning has been proven to be as important as learning, because we can get stuck in ways that we think about things. So really focusing on, for myself, on my own humility and open-mindedness about knowledge and who holds it and how we construct it together. Those have been really important lessons for me. And in terms of hopes that I have, I want to acknowledge a few really important supports. So being part of communities like with you all, with PreventConnect, and being able to interact with RPE folks and people in Delta and other audiences, and with yourselves. So a lot of gratitude for that. Also the infographic that we participated in with Casey and Arlene and Joyce, their consultant, and other Delta grantees under Delta Impact. that economic justice infographic is really powerful and tells a very powerful story. And I just want to say, too, that folks like the Moves to End Violence, the Resonance Network, Norma Wong's work with collective acceleration, being part of those kind of movements, that would be for me a hope that I have, is that more of us join movements like that center our humanity and wholeness and others like in our movement, so that we can keep growing together in ways that aren't in textbooks and aren't in the science books, but are really grounded in our humanity.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I echo a lot of those hopes. And for sharing your insights and everything that you have. This has been really wonderful to have this conversation. I want to extend a huge thank you to you both, Lucy and Cynthia. Your perspectives and your story throughout Delta and in Rhode Island really highlight the incredible work and impact that Delta has had over the last few years. We talk about how Delta has shifted the way that we work in the anti-violence movement and the way that we see prevention. And that is just so clearly represented and reflected by you both and your work.
Thank you so much for having us and for helping me take that trip down memory lane. It's been wonderful to discuss our journey, the positive changes that we've seen in Rhode Island and nationally. So thank you.
Thank you so much to our listeners for tuning into this episode of Delta Reflections. Stay with us as we continue to explore the incredible stories and achievements of the Delta Project. Until next time.
PreventConnect is brought to you by Valor US and the Centers for Disease Control. You can find more information about this episode, along with past episodes, web conferences, and blog articles at PreventConnect.org. As we work to bring you more podcasts like this one, we need your help ensuring that this podcast and others like it reaches listeners like you. Take a second to rate this podcast wherever you're listening to it. That helps us show up on main podcasting pages and reach new listeners. And of course, if you have an idea for a topic that you'd like to see us cover, reach out to us and comment on this post on our Instagram page.